The whispering fields. The Bavarian wind carries strange whispers in spring. When I first arrived at the Hinterkaifeck farm, I could still hear them, soft murmurs brushing through the trees, as though the land itself remembered what had happened here. It was April 1922, a week after the murders. I was a junior investigator, fresh-faced and unprepared for the kind of darkness I was about to walk into. The farmhouse stood alone in the fields, a cluster of weathered wood and gray stone surrounded by endless forest. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, but the smell of hay, blood, and decay still hung thick in the air. The victims had already been discovered by neighbors, 6 bodies in total. Andreas Gruber, 63, stern and hard. His wife Kazilia, weary and quiet. Their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, young but broken by life. Her 2 children, Kazilia, just 7, and Joseph, barely 2. And the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived that very day. No one had survived. As I stepped into the barn where the first bodies were found, my boots crunched on frozen straw. The air was unnaturally still, and the animals stirred uneasily in their stalls. 4 of the victims lay covered by blood-soaked hay. Someone had dragged them together, almost with care, stacking them as if trying to hide what had been done. But what struck me first wasn't the violence, it was the order. The cows had been milked, the dog fed, the fireplace lit. Whoever had murdered the Grubers stayed here, living among the dead for days. As I looked at the footprints outside, I remembered the story neighbors told. Andreas Gruber had found footprints in the snow leading toward the house days before the murders, but none leaving. He'd heard footsteps in the attic, found a newspaper from Munich he never bought, and saw his house keys go missing. He laughed it off, telling his neighbors he must have imagined things. But he hadn't imagined this. That night, as I made my first notes by lantern light, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still out there, watching the farm from the tree-line. Thanks for your time you always spent to watch our videos. We greatly value your support, so please share this video with your loved ones. Do us a favor and subscribe right away, regardless of where you are watching. Let's dive into the Hinterkaifeck murders, Germany's most terrifying unsolved farmhouse killings. The night the silence broke. The storm came without warning, cold, sharp, and heavy with snow. By dusk on March 31st, 1922, Hinterkaifeck stood swallowed by white mist. The Gruber family huddled inside, unaware that it would be their last night alive. I've reconstructed that night 100 times in my mind, using every note, every autopsy, every testimony. Somewhere in the middle of that silence, death began to move through the house. Andreas and his wife, Kazilia, were in the kitchen when they first heard it. A rustle in the barn, perhaps a thud. They assumed it was one of the cows or the wind shifting the wooden beams. But the truth was far worse. The killer was already there. One by one, they were drawn outside, each by a sound, a light, or a voice they trusted. Maybe it was the cry of a cow, the slam of a door, or even the killer mimicking a familiar tone. Whatever it was, each family member walked into the dark, and none came back. In the barn, the weapon waited. A mattock, a farmer's tool for digging and chopping wood. The first to fall was Andreas, struck in the skull. His wife, Kazilia, followed, her face half shattered by the same blow. Then came Victoria, the young widow. She fought. The evidence was clear, her arms bruised, her face bloodied, her jaw broken. When they found her, she was lying across her mother's body, as if she tried to shield her from the final strike. But it's the death of little Kazilia, 7 years old, that still haunts me most. The autopsy showed she was alive for hours after her skull had been fractured, her small hands clutching her hair, torn from her scalp. She had lain in the hay beside her dead family, slowly dying in the cold. Inside the house, the killer's work continued. Joseph, the baby, was found in his crib, killed by a single blow to the head, and the maid Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived only that afternoon, was found in her bed, covered neatly with a sheet, as if someone pitted her. I remember standing over that blood-soaked straw, the lantern flickering against the barn walls, wondering what kind of person could do something like this, and then stay to live among the corpses. For nearly 4 days, someone slept under that roof. They ate the family's food, fed the cows, and kept the fire burning as snow fell outside. There were no footprints leading away. The killer had vanished, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The discovery and the search. For 4 days, the Hinterkaifeck farm sat eerily quiet. The smoke that usually rose from the chimney was gone. The mail piled up. The children missed school. And yet the animals were fed, their soft cries echoing faintly across the fields. By April 4th, 1922, the neighbors could no longer ignore the unease that had settled over the countryside. When Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a nearby farmer, gathered a small search party to check on the Grubers, he expected to find illness, or perhaps a family snowed in. He could never have imagined what lay behind that barn door. They called out. No one answered. The dog barked furiously from inside. Schlittenbauer led the way, forcing open the creaking wooden door of the barn. At first, they saw only hay, then something dark beneath it. When they pulled the hay aside, the truth emerged, bodies piled one upon another, twisted and broken. Andreas, Kazilia, Victoria, and little Kazilia. The men stumbled back, retching into the straw. Inside the farmhouse, the horror continued. The baby, Joseph, lay still in his cradle. The maid, Maria, was in her bed, covered carefully, almost respectfully. The searchers ran from room to room, their footsteps echoing through the silence. The air was heavy with something more than death. It was as if time itself had stopped inside those walls. When police from Munich arrived later that day, led by Inspector George Reingruber, they were greeted by chaos. Curious villagers had already crowded around the property, trampling the snow, leaving footprints everywhere, destroying the only clues that might have revealed the killer's path. Still, even among the confusion, certain things stood out. The doors were locked from the inside. Money and jewelry were untouched. The family's meals were half-eaten, dishes still on the table. The chimney had been cleaned recently, as if someone had lived there comfortably. Then there were the small details that refused to make sense. A hole had been cut into a wooden wall, perhaps used as a peephole to watch the house. An old newspaper from Munich lay on the table. No one in the household subscribed to it. And in the barn, buried deep in straw, police found a strange, rusted key that fit no lock on the property. When I examined the scene myself, days later, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. There was method in the madness, patience even. Whoever did this had waited, watched, and struck with terrifying precision. As the sun set that evening, the investigators packed up their notes. Behind them, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse loomed in silhouette against the darkening sky. Its windows, like eyes, stared back, mute witnesses to a secret that would outlive us all. The investigation, theories, and suspects. In the weeks that followed the discovery, Bavaria's silence was broken only by the whispers of rumor. The murders at Hinterkaifeck had shocked the nation. An entire family slaughtered, no robbery, no clear motive, and a killer who had lived among the corpses. The police investigation, led by Inspector George Reingruber and his team from Munich, began in earnest. I was there, assigned to assist with gathering testimonies, reviewing autopsies, and collecting what little evidence remained after the crowd had trampled the snow. The first suspect, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. All eyes turned to Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the same man who had helped discover the bodies. He was a neighbor, a widower, and once he had been Victoria Gabriel's lover. Whispers claimed that her youngest child, Joseph, was his son, though the church had denied Victoria permission to remarry after her husband was presumed dead in the war. When Schlittenbauer entered the barn that day, witnesses said he acted strangely calm, unlocking doors with ease, moving through rooms as if he already knew what he'd find. Some swore he untied the family's dog without flinching. Others noticed he touched the baby's crib, murmuring something under his breath. He told police he was simply checking if anyone was still alive. But his composure, his familiarity with the property, it left a stain of suspicion that never faded. Yet there was no hard evidence, no blood on his clothes, no weapon, nothing but unease. The family's secrets. As the investigation deepened, The Grubers' private lives began to unravel. It was revealed that Andreas and Victoria, father and daughter, were accused of an incestuous relationship. Both had served brief prison terms for it in 1915. Locals whispered that Andreas ruled his household with cruelty and paranoia. Some believe Victoria's child, Joseph, might not have been Schlittenbauer's at all, but her father's. The farmhouse, so quiet and isolated, had hidden a web of shame and secrecy long before the murders. The clues that made no sense. The evidence confounded every theory. No valuables were stolen. The phone lines were cut. The murder weapon, a mattock, was later found hidden in the attic, cleaned and wiped. The animals remained fed and calm, suggesting someone stayed to care for them. Neighbors reported smoke from the chimney days after the murders, and someone using the farm's lanterns at night. The police even consulted clairvoyants, desperate for answers. Nothing came of it. The theories. Over time, the case divided into 4 main theories. Revenge, Schlittenbauer or another villager, enraged by jealousy or betrayal. Robbery. Though nothing was taken, some believed a thief panicked and murdered everyone. Vagrant or soldier, a drifter hiding in the attic, surviving off the farm until discovered. The supernatural. The villagers spoke in whispers, ghosts, curses, demons. Andreas Gruber himself had complained of voices in the attic. Had he sensed the presence that would kill him? Every time I reread the reports, one thing chills me most. The killer didn't flee. He stayed, calmly tending to the farm as if it were his home. Who could commit such horror and then live peacefully beside it? Shadows of the past. After the police packed up their notes and the reporters left, the Hinterkaifeck farm stood alone again, silent, empty, and cursed. The fields grew wild, the windows shattered, and the villagers began to cross themselves whenever they passed the lane that led there. I returned often, not as an officer, but as a man haunted by what I'd seen. The world had moved on, but the land had not. Neighbors swore that on cold nights, they saw a lantern flicker inside the barn long after the murders. Others heard the dog barking or a woman's cry carried by the wind. And always the same eerie sound, the creak of footsteps above the attic. But there were no footprints, no visitors, no reason for light to glow inside an abandoned home. Just echoes, the aftermath. The bodies were buried together in the small cemetery of Weidhofen. Only Victoria's son, Joseph, was laid in a separate grave, tiny, alone, his headstone smaller than the others. At the funeral, the crowd overflowed. Some wept, others stood silent, their faces hard, as if grieving something far deeper than death, a loss of innocence, perhaps. The farmhouse itself became a morbid pilgrimage site. Curious travelers came from Munich and Augsburg to stare at the place where the Hinterkaifeck horror had unfolded. Children dared each other to step through its doorway. And more than once, villagers claimed to see fresh footprints in the dust, though no one had entered. Eventually, in 1923, the Gruber family's relatives had the farmhouse demolished. They wanted the memory gone, erased from the earth. But when workers began tearing it down, they found strange objects hidden in the walls. Old coins, photographs, and a rusted box containing the remains of the murder weapon. Even in destruction, the farm refused to give up its secrets. A case that wouldn't die. Decades passed. New detectives reopened the case in 1951 and again in 1970, using modern techniques. They examined the skulls of the victims, sent all the way to Munich for forensic study. But during the war, those skulls were lost or destroyed, vanishing like the truth itself. Each new investigation only deepened the mystery. One officer wrote, "The killer knew them. The killer belonged there." Even now, in the archives of Bavaria, the Hinterkaifeck file remains one of the most detailed and disturbing cases in European criminal history. 6 lives ended in silence. No arrests, no justice, only questions that echo through time. Sometimes I still dream of the barn, the hay piled high, the air still and cold, the faint sound of a baby crying from the house. I wait before I reach the door, because some doors, I've learned, are not meant to be opened again. The theories revisited, It's been years since I first stepped into the ruins of Hinterkaifeck, yet the case still pulls at me, like a wound that refuses to close. I've pored over every report, every statement, every yellowed photograph of the barn and the faces of the dead. The evidence never changes, but the way it haunts you does. Over time, new theories have risen and fallen, each one claiming to solve the mystery, yet each leaving behind more questions than answers. Theory 1, the jealous lover. The first and most persistent name was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor, the former lover, the possible father of little Joseph. Many believe jealousy or revenge drove him to kill. Some say Victoria threatened to take him to court for child support. Others claim Andreas forbade her from ever seeing him again. Schlittenbauer's behavior that day in the barn still fuels the fire. He moved through the rooms as though he knew the layout by heart. He touched the bodies and opened doors no one else dared to. And when questioned, he said things no outsider could have known, details not yet public. Yet, despite the rumors, no physical evidence tied him to the murders. His alibi held. His clothes were clean. If he was a killer, he was meticulous, cold, calculating, and cruel beyond measure. And if he wasn't, then the true murderer had walked free while the town turned against an innocent man. Theory 2, the stranger in the attic. This theory chills me the most. Andreas Gruber had reported hearing footsteps above his head days before the killings. Tools went missing. Keys disappeared. A newspaper appeared that no one had bought. Some investigators believed a vagrant or escaped soldier had been living secretly in the attic, watching the family, learning their habits, and waiting for the right moment. The footprints in the snow leading to the house, but not away, support that. Whoever it was might have slipped in during a storm, hiding in the rafters while the family slept below, biding time until discovery forced his hand. The thought still keeps me awake. For days, they lived under the same roof as their killer. They heard him, but didn't believe what they heard. Theory 3, the robbery gone wrong. Some said it was a robbery, a simple explanation for an unspeakable act. But that theory falls apart under its own weight. Money was found untouched. Gold coins lay openly on the dresser. The murderer didn't search or steal. He killed and stayed. Whoever did this wasn't after fortune. They were after something or someone far more personal. Theory 4, the curse of Hinterkaifeck. Even decades later, villagers whispered of the curse. They said Andreas had sinned too deeply, and the land itself had turned against him. They said they'd seen lights in the woods at night, figures moving in fog, and the sound of an axe long after the house was gone. Rational minds dismiss such things. But after you've seen what I've seen, the precision, the silence, the patience of that killer, you start to wonder if evil can anchor itself to a place. The last truth. In my final years with the department, I reviewed the entire file one last time. No new suspects, no new motives. Just the same cold facts, and the same unanswered question that's haunted Germany for more than a century. Why didn't they run? The Grubers had sensed danger. Andreas had spoken of noises, of missing keys, of eyes watching from the woods. Yet on that final night, they stayed. Maybe they thought they were safe within those walls. Maybe they thought monsters were only born in stories. But Hinterkaifeck proved otherwise. The haunting legacy. Time has a way of softening memory, but not this one. Even decades later, the name Hinterkaifeck still sends a chill down the spine of anyone who dares to whisper it. Long after the farmhouse was torn down, its ghost remained, not as a specter in the night, but as a wound carved into the heart of a country, the farm that wouldn't rest. After the demolition in 1923, the land where the Gruber family once lived lay empty for years. Grass grew over the ruins. Birds built nests where walls had once stood. But the villagers said nothing grew right there. The crops wilted. Animals avoided the path. And children refused to play near it. When the church finally built a memorial cross near the site, they said prayers every year on the anniversary of the murders. Even now, locals leave candles and flowers at the edge of the old road, whispering blessings under their breath. Not out of reverence, but out of fear. I've stood there many times, watching the fog roll across the fields. It's beautiful, in a way, peaceful. But beneath that silence, you can feel it. The same cold pressure in your chest, the same quiet that once preceded screams. The case that wouldn't die. In the years that followed, new investigators reopened the file again and again. By the 1950s, criminal psychology had evolved, and experts re-examined witness statements, autopsy notes, and crime scene sketches. Their conclusions were chillingly consistent. The killer was familiar with the victims and the layout of the property. The killer showed no panic or haste. The killer demonstrated intimate knowledge of farm life. In short, the murderer wasn't a stranger. They were one of their own. Even in modern times, German police and amateur sleuths have tried to solve it with DNA technology and digital reconstructions. But every path leads to the same dead end. No prints, no weapon, no confessions. Only a darkness that grows deeper the more you look into it. The legacy in culture and fear. The Hinterkaifeck murders seeped into folklore, into books, documentaries, and the whispered tales of grandparents trying to frighten their children into obedience. It became a symbol of isolation, of what happens when fear festers behind closed doors. The perfect family, the quiet farm, the watchful woods, until one night, the silence breaks. To this day, visitors claim to feel uneasy near the site. One historian who visited the field in the 1980s described hearing footsteps behind him, though he was completely alone. When he turned around, he saw only flattened grass, a single trail of footprints leading nowhere. The investigator's reflection. I'm old now. My hands tremble when I write these words, but I still dream of that place, its frozen soil, its empty windows. Sometimes I wonder if the murderer ever stood where I stand now, staring across those fields, wondering if anyone would ever know the truth. Perhaps they carried the secret to their grave. Or perhaps they're still here, somewhere in the earth beneath that field, watching the world forget. But we haven't forgotten, and we never will. Finally, they say time heals all wounds. But some wounds never close. Some are carved too deep, etched not just into the earth, but into memory itself. Hinterkaifeck was one of those wounds. The lost voices, sick souls, each with dreams, routines, and laughter that once filled a farmhouse at the edge of a Bavarian forest. Now only silence speaks for them. Andreas Gruber, the proud patriarch, stubborn, secretive, yet fiercely protective. Kazilia Gruber, the weary matriarch, her life defined by endurance, faith, and quiet sorrow. Victoria Gabriel, the daughter, strong, beautiful, burdened by secrets she never chose to carry. Kazilia Jr., just 7 years old, who fought for her last breath, clutching her hair in terror. Joseph, the baby, a life barely begun, snuffed out before his first spring. Maria Baumgartner, the maid, her first night at the farm, also her last. These were not just names in a police report. They were people who laughed, argued, sang, and dreamed beneath that same roof that would become their tomb. And now, they rest beneath the same soil where the truth still sleeps. A candle in the dark. Each year, someone still places flowers at their graves. No one knows who. Maybe a descendant. Maybe just a stranger who can't bear the thought of them being forgotten. As the candlelight flickers across the headstones, it feels like the victims are finally being seen, not as shadows in a mystery, but as lives that mattered. And in that quiet glow, there's something almost redemptive, as if remembrance itself is a form of justice. What we learned: Hinterkaifeck isn't just a murder mystery. It's a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of human nature: fear, secrecy, and silence. A reminder that sometimes the greatest horrors don't come from monsters in the dark, but from the hearts of those we trust. And yet, it's also a story of resilience, of investigators who refuse to give up, of storytellers who continue to ask questions decades later, of viewers like you who keep their memory alive by simply listening. A wise word. I've spent my life chasing the truth behind that farmhouse. But now, as I grow older, I realize something. The truth may not bring peace, but remembering them might. So tonight, if you've watched this far, light a candle, whisper a prayer, or simply hold a moment of silence for them. Because justice isn't always found in courtrooms or confessions. Sometimes it's found in memory, in the simple act of never letting the world forget. Please subscribe to the Famographic Show for more videos. Thanks for watching.